From the heart of shadow they emerge, the nightmarish hunters of Comera. Their forms writhe with a natural energy, and their eyes burn with the hunger of the void. Are you ready to master the chilling beauty of the Drukhari Mandrakes? Today, we'll unlock their secrets and guide you through spectral blends and otherworldly glows. A huge thanks to Games Workshop for sending me out the Kill Team Nightmare box early. Let's get painting. The first thing I've done is prime all the miniatures using grey Seer. We want a nice bright prime on these. And now we're going to dry brush them with some white paint. I'm using my funky new Series D dry brushes, which Artist Opus very kindly sent out to me. Now these models are fairly delicate, so we just want to be quite careful as we dry brush, but just work your way across them all, starting to pick out some of those raised areas. We also want to get all of the indentations and glowing elements white as well. So I'm going to thin down some bold titanium white from Procryl and paint this into all of the recesses where I'm going to want a glow. Don't worry about being too tidy with this because we're going to do lots of layers on top of everything as we work our way forward. It's just important to get a nice solid layer of white in those recesses. When that's completely dry, it's time to start the glow effect. Now the first colour we're going to use for this is Tesseract Glow, which is a really nice yellowy green colour. The key is to not have too much on your brush, because if it's too thick, it'll tend towards the green side of things. We want it more towards that luminous yellow. So if you've got a bit too much on your brush, just dab it off and then paint it over the white in those recesses. Again, don't worry about being too careful. As long as it's yellow in the recess, that's the important thing. Using these four colours, I'm going to show you how to really easily paint the glowing smoke effect on these mandrakes. We're going to be working fairly quickly, so make sure you've got all four pots of paint open. The first thing we're going to do is paint the first third to a half of the area we want to have that glow with Tesseract Glow. Don't worry about being too tidy, just make sure you work it into all the recesses and that you don't leave any white spots. While that is still wet and with the same brush, I'm going to dip this into the Striking Scorpion Green. And now I'm going to paint the next third to a quarter of the glowing area. When it comes to where the two colours mix, they'll blend into each other quite nicely because they're still wet. Doing the same thing and using the same principle, I'm then going to take some Karandras Green and paint the rest of the smoky area that I want to have this ethereal glow. To finish off, I'll paint some Dark Angel Green just on the tips. I'm going to paint all of the Mandrake Flesh next, and the colour I'm using for this is Black Templar. Now it's really, really important that you take your time and are very careful because we don't want to spill this into the recesses because it will leave a dark mark there. Now I will make mistakes here, and if you make mistakes I am going to show you how to fix it, but generally we just want to get the Black Templar down over the flesh, and this will kind of give us a nice blue hue. We'll build up the highlights a little bit later on. Now the Black Templar has dried and it's not quite worked the way I was anticipating it. I thought it might give us a little bit of a green effect showing through next to those runes where we'd already painted. It's not done that, so it's time to go and put that back in ourselves. The colour I'm going to use for this is Warpstone Glow. Now, this won't show through the black very well at all. The coverage will be quite poor going directly onto the black, and that's absolutely fine because that works in our favour. So what I'm looking to do is just paint lines around the edges of those engraved runes on the torso and the arms. So take your time and work your way around. We're then going to enhance the glow of the carved runes. So to do that, we're going to take some Dorn Yellow, thin it down with a little bit of water so it does flow, and I'm going to paint this inside the runes. Now we are going back over things we've already finished, and that's because it's not quite turned out the way I thought it would. There's absolutely no issue with that because it's so easy to fix just with some additional layers. When that's dry, I'm going to take some Striking Scorpion Green, take most of it off my brush, so I've only got a tiny amount on there, and paint this over those carved runes. Now this is going to go over the Dorn Yellow, and it's also going to go over the Warpstone Glow that we've got along the edges. And once this dries, this is going to give us a much nicer glow effect on those runes. I'm going to paint in the flayed flesh on the clothing next. I'm going to use contrast paint for that again. So we've got Guilliman Flesh, Darkoath Flesh, and Fyreslayer Flesh. And all I'm going to do is just rotate through the different colours, painting the sections in. Really easy and straightforward. If you want to enhance some of the colour, or if you want to make it a little bit darker so it stands out more, there's a bit more contrast, That's really easy to do. Just let the first layer dry and then put a second layer on top of it. I'm going to use Flesh Terror's red contrast paint for the Horde on the robes. And I'm also going to use this for any bands or leather strap type elements. To paint the cloak, I'm going to take some Murnfang Brown. Now, you could potentially use something like Snakebite Leather contrast paint, but I find the difference in the darker recesses to the lighter areas to be too much. I also find it doesn't give a nice even coverage, so I'm going back to the traditional layer style. Because this is going over a much brighter area, then I will need 2 coats of it. Don't forget, as I'm painting these mandrakes, if you want to see a little bit of a preview of the sprues or the unpainted versions, I've got a full review on my Patreon. There's a link in the description, and you don't have to be a paying member to see the review. You can just sign up for free. I'm then going to take a 50-50 mix of Murnfang Brown and Deathclaw Brown. Now I'm going to paint this over the majority of the robes, leaving the Murnfang Brown in the recesses. Now I'm not using a wash, again, because that's going to give me too harsh an effect. I want these brown robes to be fairly light to contrast the rest of the darkness. So just work your way around, catch all those raised areas, those raised folds, but don't paint it all the way down into the recesses. I'm going to finish the robes up with some pure Deathclaw Brown, and I'm just going to focus this on those sharpest edges and sharpest folds. Where I've got nice hard moulded lines, I'm going to just drag the brush along to get a nice crisp highlight. But generally with this step, less is more. If you want to punch this effect up a bit more, you can pop some Towelite Ochre on as a final highlight, but I'm happy just with the Deathclaw. Now, as I've been a little bit messy, I needed to tidy up some elements. So I'm just taking some Corax White and painting all of the hair. And I'm also painting any bone elements that I've accidentally painted over so far. I'm going to take some Skeleton Horde contrast paint to cover all the bone areas. This is going to work really nicely, really easily over the white, and it'll settle into those recesses quite nicely. There's no need to highlight this unless you really want to. Next up, I'm going to take some Gryph Charger Grey contrast paint and paint this all over the hair. Now, again, another key part with this, we don't slop it on because we don't want it to act so much as a contrast colour. We just want it to get into those recesses because we'll highlight in the next step. So if you've got a big blob on your brush, just tap that off. We don't want too much on at all. Next up, I'll take some bold titanium white, and I'm going to use this to highlight the hair. Now, in some places, I can drag the tip of the brush along the hair and catch the strands, and that gives me a nice highlight. In other areas, I'm going to have to paint it on, so it's got to be really careful and make sure I've got a really good point on my brush. We'll highlight all of the flesh next. So the first colour I'm going to use is Dark Reaper. Now, this is fairly thin and doesn't cover particularly well, which is great for making a nice transition. In terms of the parts of the flesh we're looking to catch, it's really the bits facing upwards, and we're basically painting in the musculature, leaving that black Templar in the recesses. If you're happy with how your flesh looks, you don't have to do this step. Well, next up, we'll add some Thunderhawk Blue, again focusing on those parts of the flesh that are facing upwards, taking into account the shape of the musculature. Again, if you're happy with how it looks with just Black Templar, you can skip this and the next step. We're just pushing the highlighting a little bit. The final highlight is with some Fenrisian Grey. Now, this is a very stark highlight in comparison to the rest of the flesh. We want to use it very sparingly. I have thinned this down a little bit with water as well, and I'm tapping my brush on a paper towel before I paint the miniature. This means that it blends down quite nicely as it dries. To base all the silver, I'm using dark aluminium from Vallejo. This is a thin metal paint, but it does cover fantastically well. The reason I mentioned about it being thin is that it can get away from you and will flow into recesses, so just be careful with it. If you haven't got this, you can use something like Lead Belcher, or you can use Surcoat Silver from Tooth & Coats, whatever you've got. It's just that dark metallic colour that we use to base it. Now on the box art, all of the metallic elements look quite dirty rather than a clean metal, so I'm going to wash them all with some Agrax Earthshade. The one thing I'm going to do is just be careful not to let the Agrax settle in pools or patches, because otherwise I'm going to have to go in and paint over it, and I just really want to highlight the metal once this is dry. While I'm waiting for the Agrax to dry, I'm going to pick up another element, which is this shadowy cloak. And to get the effect on this that you can see on the box art, the first thing I'm going to do is paint it with Sigvald Burgundy. Now you can see that this is going into the recesses quite heavily and giving me a nice little transition. What's important is that as it dries, I just keep it out of the recesses too much, because otherwise the stark contrast is going to be a little bit too much. Once the silver's dry, I'm going to take chrome from Vallejo Model Air and I'm going to highlight all of the silver areas. This is really easy and straightforward. The majority of the time, I'm just dragging my brush along the shape of the model to get a really nice, crisp highlight. Back to this shadowy cloak, and I want to add a little bit of depth into the recesses. So I'm going to take some Leviathan Purple contrast paint and just stipple and dab and draw some lines of this in those deepest recesses. If you're happy with how it looks, again, you can skip this step if you want. I'm then going to give it a quick highlight, starting with some pink horror. Generally, you can drag this along some of the sharp edges to get a nice crisp highlight, and generally, you just want to pull it down those sharpest raised folds. Now, I'm not going all the way down to the bottom, I'm just focusing on the top half of these folds. Lastly, I'm going to take some Emperor's Children, which is a bright pink colour. I'm going to focus this just towards the top quarter, top third. Again, painting it inside the pink horror from the previous step. This gives me a nice effect. It's not an exact match for what the box art is, but it is a nice approximation and does stand out quite nicely against the rest of this mandrake. And there we have it. These mandrakes are done and ready to stalk the shadows. I really hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, leave a like and a comment down below. A huge thank you to all my patrons whose support is invaluable and helps me keep making these videos. If you want to see how I painted the Night Lords from this box set, then check this link here. Otherwise, I will see you next time.